democracy, unlike what you might think, and actually many lawyers think this way, is not only a set of institutions. Democracy is a vital ideal that involves constant nonviolent struggle. So it's a permanent mode of questioning. It's a permanent mode of dissenting. It is a critical regime. It is a regime of criticism. In countries where we do not have the possibility to criticize our governors, we don't have democracies. They say that they are democrats, but we do not have democracies. Even in Trump's America, if they say, if we cannot impeach Trump, for example, and we do not have the capacities of impeaching our presidents and prime ministers, we are not living in a democracy. So this mode of questioning and interrogating is deeply important in democracies and in countries in transition to democracy also, very important. So here we're talking about a democratic education, which is a process of self-questioning. It's a process of what Gandhi called self-realization. It's a process of self-rule altogether. And it's a process in which the powerless can obtain the power of changing things. I love this phrase of Václav Havel, the ex-president of Czechoslovakia, who I met because when I was a student, I was very active against apartheid in South Africa, in Paris. I was very active for Eastern Europe, democratization. So I got to know many dissidents who later on, they went back and they changed their countries. And I had the opportunity of meeting Havel actually several times before he passed away. And as you know, one of his key phrases is power of the powerless. Now, democracy is the power of the powerless. And Rajaji is actually one of the, I would say, examples of that. He fights for the powerless and he tries to democratize Indian democracy. So here is where nonviolence comes in, and it's so important because nonviolence is a vital, strategic means in the hands of the powerless. It's what we can call a sweet process of persuasion and transformation. It's sweet because it's not bitter. Remember what Mandela always said. When I get out of prison, if I have still bitterness, I look backward and I have bitterness, I will not be free. I'm only free if I look back at my times in Robben Islands and I do not feel bitterness. So a sweet process of persuasion. But it's also the creative form of dissent, a creative form of dissent, not a destructive form of dissent. And I will call it, for our mediators who are sitting around this table and down there, it's a repertoire of mediation and reconciliation. A repertoire of mediation and reconciliation. So this is very important. And in the history of humanity, we have a group of people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Tolstoy, Lord Buddha, Mahavira, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, Jesus Christ, just name them, who actually, they had to make the choice. These are people who made choices in their lives, who became mediators, who became people who were emblems of reconciliation. And they were not ordinary people, because ordinary people, it's difficult for them to make this choice. Sometimes they do not make these choices. And here, what is important, getting slowly to Martin Luther King, is that all these people that we're talking about, including Martin Luther King, they refused to believe that any human being could be inferior on the basis of his or her birth. They refused to believe that injustice is a natural phenomenon. They were dreamers, yes. Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. They were dreamers. Gandhi talked about the India of his dream. But they were practical dreamers. Now to get to Martin Luther King, why did I decide to talk about MLK? This is the 50th year of, we celebrate, we do not celebrate, but we try to think about him, of his assassination. 50 years ago, MLK was assassinated in America. And after 50 years, we still think of him as what we call an American Gandhi through his methods of nonviolence, which he learned partly from Gandhi, but he also learned from the Black Civil Rights Movement in America, and he learned from other origins. But what was very important in the work and life of Martin Luther King Jr. was the idea that we have to democratize American democracy. We have the power to democratize a democracy. It doesn't mean that when we get to a democracy, everything is finished. You know, many people in Africa, Middle East, Asia, they think that if their country is called a democracy, their task is finished. So they can go home and become passive and sleep. I think that's only the beginning of the journey when you say that we have a democracy. So you have to go on and fight. And this is where King's political philosophy became so important, because not only he identified himself with nonviolence, but he tried to apply it to his understanding and changing of American democracy. So here we have not only a very simple Baptist priest, not only a simple theologian, not a simple person who went to Boston University and had a PhD in philosophy or theology. We're talking about a radical mind. We're talking about the radical mind. A radical mind who was anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-conformist. Very important, I think, this last aspect. One of the sicknesses, diseases, I think, from my point of view, of democracies in today's world is that they have become conformist, complacent, conservative, and they turn to populism. Look at Europe, look at the United States of America. They have become populist regimes. And populism is always a danger, big danger. For India is like that also. Mr. Modi and company, they are populists. Big danger, because in populism you do not have education of democracy. You have education of future fascism. So it's very important that people know about that. So here King comes in, and we have to talk about a dissenting king, a radical king. But why do I say radical? Because he's a man who believes not only in a political revolution, as many of our communist friends believed in for 100 years, but in a revolution of values, what he called the revolution of values. All our countries around the world today need a revolution of values. One of the revolutions which we need to start if we want to continue, we're going to be dead in 50 years from now, but our grandchildren are supposed to be there. And if we don't have this revolution of values, they will not have a planet to live on. So one of the values we have to change is our relationship with nature. This is only one of the values. Not being a consumer society as the way we are. So he believed in revolution of values, and he believed that this revolution of values are the core values of the changes in our world. Now, the foundation of revolution of values in American society, what did this mean? For King, this was the highest form of patriotism. Patriotism, and I believe in that, it's not when you salute your flag. It's not when you say, like the Americans say very often, you see it in Hollywood movies also, but it's repeated by many people. when you say, I have to go and die or kill for my country. This is not patriotism. This is nationalism. There's a difference between the two. Dissent from the point of view of Martin Luther King, knowing how to change your country, how to make a revolution of values, is the highest form of patriotism. Why? Because he believed that there is a actually interrelated structure of reality. The world is interconnected. We cannot show up here today at this conference and say, sit down very passively and listening to me and say, we are only Bangladeshis. We don't care about what's going on in Pakistan, in India, in Iran, in America, because we are only Bangladeshis. This is not true. You are not only Bangladeshis. You are also citizens of the world. You are also responsible for what's going on right now in America, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Africa. You cannot be insensitive. You cannot open your channel of TV and watch people and kids getting killed in Syria and being bombed, and you say, I don't feel any empathy for them, or I'm completely indifferent because these are not Bengalis and Bangladeshis, and these are only Syrians. You cannot be indifferent about the children who die in the Mediterranean Sea while they are trying to get away from the wars and find a refuge in Europe. You cannot be. But unfortunately, we are. Now, Martin Luther King came up with the idea of the world house. He said, our world is our house. It's our home, where individuals can communicate with each other. And there is a moral order which was created by God. Of course, he's a believer. And he says there is a justice in the world. There is supposed to be a moral order because God wanted this way. So we need to reevaluate our values according to that. We have to have a new mode of living, a new mode of thinking, and get transfer of power from a market-driven, market-oriented form of life, a warmonger world, to a world of radical love in freedom and radical freedom in love. And here, I think that when we talk about peace and Martin Luther King becomes so important, we have to get back to the idea of justice. You know? The idea of justice is very important. I teach, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a philosopher, but I'm the vice dean of a law school, and I teach 4th year, 5th year law students. 99.9% of my students only want to become corporate lawyers because there is money in them. And so they have no sense of what law and justice is. And I said, God damn it, what does it mean to become a lawyer in a world just for money and power? And not to have an idea. It's like a doctor who has no sense of what medicine is and why, when you're operating someone, you're just doing it because they're going to pay you fees, high fees for the operation, and not because you were supposed by the Hippocratic sermon to save someone, you know? So the humanist value behind it, which brings our societies together and which makes this world house, which King is talking about, is completely lost there. So King's emphasis is on justice and not that much on law, because he often repeated what St. Augustine used to say: an unjust law is no law at all. And God knows how much unjust laws we have in our countries and in today's world. So how do we criticize unjust laws in the name of justice? How do we fight against unjust laws? How did Gandhi, Henry David Thoreau, Tolstoy, Martin Luther King, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and many others fought in the name of justice? Not in the name of law, in the name of justice. Because unjust laws dehumanize a person, and actually just laws uplift human personality. And King knew about that. So Here, what is so important is the idea of civic friendship, which is so important. You know, some of you sitting in this room while I'm talking, you're playing with your iPhones. You're chatting, you're sending texts, and you think that this is a form of friendship. This is not a form of friendship. I remember a very famous Polish philosopher, Bauman, who died 5 years ago. When I met him at a conference, he was 85 years old. And he said, you know, the concept of friendship has changed in our world. Today, people go to the Facebook and they say they have 500 friends. In 80 years of life, I don't even have 5 friends. Because having friends is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing, you know? So, civic friendship is more important to what you're doing right now, tapping on your, iPhone, and thinking that you're creating an interrelationship. This is not an interrelationship, actually, that you're creating. You're bringing money to Apple company, or to Amazon, or to another communication. You're not doing anything on the human basis, you know? So, and here the concept of justice is completely absent in what you're doing. Now, here I think that this is where the king's importance comes in again, very important, because he goes back to the idea of democracy beyond races, beyond classes, beyond religions, beyond poor and rich, and beyond power relations. And he talks about the interrelating human existences in a society. And this is where a genuine revolution of values becomes important as a humanistic transformation, demanding the principles of justice, equality, and democracy. And this is where King's idea of peace becomes important, and he was assassinated because of that. We know who were the people who killed him, and why they killed him. Because in 1967, after practically 20 years, more than 20 years, 22 years of fight for civil rights of the blacks in America, King, despite the fact that his friends told him not to interfere in the American foreign policy, he said, I cannot do that. I cannot be a leader, a nonviolent leader, and not say anything about peace and against the Vietnam War. So he gave his famous speech in New York in 1967, which Lyndon Johnson, the president of the time of the United States, and FBI and everything, they actually were terrified of that. And 1 year later, he was killed. Because he believed that anti-segregation struggle and struggle for peace against the war in Vietnam are one and the same thing. They are not separated. So here we are present and we are saying the same thing. Today's fight for peace in the world and today's fight against oppression and against inequalities are one and the same fight. And you cannot separate them. So King's vision of inclusive democracy went hand in hand with a sense of responsibility and respect in regard to other nations. And we can talk about this concept of democracy, which I started with, as a total connectedness, total interconnectedness, a network of reciprocity. Again, your network of reciprocity is not Facebook or Telegram. Your network of reciprocity is where you feel responsible for the struggle that you're taking for the existence of your world, for a better world, for a peaceful world, for a world where you don't kill animals, you don't cut the trees, but you don't also dehumanize human beings. And this was where King beautifully said, if we do not learn to live as sisters and brothers, we will be forced to perish as fools. And unfortunately, when we look at the panorama of politics in today's world, we have a lot of lunatics and fools around, you know, and we have to somehow find a way out with our struggle. So here I think that I go back to this idea of cosmic companionship that I talked about, which is actually what King says, and the idea of world house, and get immediately to the fact that, slowly to my conclusion actually, that idea of peace is closely related to this conception of the world house as King had it. A larger house, not only the house in which we live, but in a bigger house in which we are responsible of. In a world house where you can have blacks and whites, you can have Easterners and Westerners, you can have Shiites and Sunnis, you can have Gentiles and Jews, you can have Catholics and Protestants, you can have Muslims and Hindus, all next to each other. All next to each other. And it's not a dream and it's not idealistic, because it's actually we're doing that. We're living together, but we hate each other. Or we do not understand each other. We do not understand each other. You know, when I finish my talk here, and if any of you who are mostly Muslims in the room, and if you want to come, I don't think there are too many Shiites in the room. Are there any Shiites in the room? No Shiites. And if you want to come and understand a little bit about Shiism, you can ask me, you know. Not because I'm a practical Muslim, I don't practice any religion, but I know about it. And I know that this misunderstanding has been a fight between Iran and Saudi Arabia, or Shiites and in Iraq, Shiites and Sunnis killing each other because they don't know about each other. And this lack of knowledge has always been a problem in our world. Look at the Hindus and Muslims in India. They don't know, I mean, common people, they don't know about each other. And because they don't know about each other, they hate each other and they have intolerance. So it's very important to do that if we want to become peacemakers, if we want to be peacekeepers. There are two attitudes and modes of being. First of all, we need to have an ultimate optimism on human nature. No human being is evil by nature, as the Nazis believed in, or Stalin believed in, or Pol Pot believed in. Okay? No human being is evil by nature. So you can have a dialogue with any human being of any cultural background, of any race, of any religion, of any age I say, because you can do it with children also.
Non-violence is about